So today's daf in Masechet Kiddushin. Good morning, everyone. Is daf Ayin. We're making very, very good progress, and in around a week and a half, or even less than that, right? I think we're going to finish the Masechet. So, God willing. So anyway, so today's daf. I think yesterday we got up to the top line of daf Ayin, the two dots. So remember, we've been discussing all these groups of people who came up with Ezra when Ezra brought the Jews back from the. It really wasn't. So it's a very interesting thing. We talked about this yesterday. I don't want to get too distracted, but it wasn't the beginning of the second Beit HaMikdash, right? It seems pretty clear from Sefer Ezra that they had already had some people who were already there. What's his name? The son, the grandson of the king, will come to me. And they had started building Beit HaMikdash, but there were a lot of locals who were giving them trouble. They didn't have any money. They didn't have any protection. And so Ezra then brought people up. So we said one of the groups he brought up, the top line, is Geri v'Charuri, freed slaves and converts. Minalan, how do you know that? Amar Chesed, Amar Kra, because the pasuk continues in Ezra and says, V'chol hanivdal mitumat goyei haaretz alehem, the people who had separated themselves from the goyim, meaning the ones who had converted or become Jews through choice, who separated themselves from the nation. So that was included in their group. Mamzeri. Now, how do we know he brought up people who were mamzerim, came from illicit relationships? Minala and dichtiv, because the pasuk says later on, in what we call Sefer Nehemiah, the end of Ezra, it says Vayishmas Sanballat HaChorani. Sanballat, who was one of the locals, who was not local, right? Because remember, the strategy of many conquerors was to bring in other populations to sort of dilute the national attachment. So Sanballat, who was Chorani, and Tuvia Ha'eved Ha'amoni, Tuvia was the slave of Ammoni, was a slave from Ammoni. It says that they heard, and it says that Ki Rabim Yehuda Balei Shvu Alo, many people in Yehuda had sworn allegiance to these foreigners, to Sanballat and Tuvia, Ki Chatanhu L'Shchania ben Arach, because he was a father-in-law, son-in-law, sorry, they were Chatan of Shchania ben Arach and Yehochanan bino, Lakach et bat Meshulam ben Brachia. Yochanan, his son, married the child of Meshulam ben Brachia, right, the daughter. So what it seems is that this person was an Eved, and they actually married into his family. And we hold the Savar Nachri ve'Eved Abba Bat Yisrael V'lan Mamzer, that if you have a non-Jew, either a slave or a Nachri, who marries a Bat Yisrael, the child is a Mamzer. So that's how you know that there were children in Eretz Yisrael who were Mamzerim, because their parents married into slave families, basically. Well, there's a few problems with that. Because first of all, right, this is a huge debate. If a non-Jew sleeps with a Jewish woman, whether that kid's a mamzer, right? That's one opinion. But there's actually a bigger opinion, actually the dominant opinion, is that the vlad is kasher. The man damar vlad kasher, the kids are not mamzerim. And furthermore, remember, these were people who were in Eretz Yisrael who were fighting against them. They were not people who came up from Bavel with Ezra. The two, well, before we get to that question, sorry. How do you know they even had children? It just says they got married. Maybe there were no offspring. But two, and the problem I just mentioned, how do you know they had them there in Eretz Bavel and brought them up? Maybe, they came from Bavel as regular Jews, meaning no one was intermarried. And then in Eretz Yisrael, they were exposed to other people, and that's where they got intermarried. So how do you can't really prove from these psukim that there were mamzerim in the group that was brought up from Ezra. There's another pasuk later on in Nehemiah which goes to another list of who came up from Bavel. And like I said yesterday, a lot of Ezra and Nehemiah, several prakim are like these phone books of lists of people. The Eileh Ha'olim Mitel Melech. These are the people who came up from a place called Tel Melech, which we're going to discuss in a second. It's a very unusual place, and we assume it means it's a code, right? Tel Melech literally means the tell of salt. Tel Charsha, people came up from Tel Charsha, which Charsha literally means, Charsha can mean Charesh, means you're deaf, right? You can't, you're silent, right? You can't speak. But it could also mean plowed over. But they came from Tel Melech, Tel Charsha, Kruv Adon. Sorry, there's a different place. Kruv, Adon, Imer. All these people came from these places. And says Nehemiah or Ezra in that book, Lo yachlo lahagid beit avotam. They couldn't tell where they came from. Meaning they had no good records. They were mixed race, basically. They couldn't tell who their father's house was. Vizaram im Yisrael hein. They didn't know if they were Jewish. Maybe they lived Jewish lives. They had rumors that they were Jewish. They couldn't trace back their genealogy to any definitive sort of Jewish background. So where are all these places? Like, what does all this mean? It says the Gemara, what this must mean is Tel Melech means Elu b'nei Adam shedomim maseim l'masei Sodom. The very famous tale of Melech, of course, was the tale of Sodom, of Eshet Lot, right? So this is referring to people whose actions are like Masei Sodom, Shenehepcha l'Tel Melech. They, Sodom, or Eshet, or the city of Sodom, became a Tel Melech. Tel Charsha, what does Tel Charsha mean? Those who are silent, meaning Zeh Shekore, as we had in the Mishnah, what we call a shtuki. Zeh Shekore Abba, right? The child calls out says to the mother, "Where's my father?" Right? And the mother, Imo Mishat Kito. The mother silences him because she doesn't necessarily know who the father is, or she doesn't want to admit to the father, as maybe he's not appropriate. So that's a case where a child comes from questionable lineage. And they had a group that couldn't say who their fathers were and whether they came from Israel. These are the real, as Rosa calls them, what do you call them again, Rosa? Foundlings? Waifs. These are the waifs that Rosa is very fond of. That they were found that were wandering around that no one really knew. Their parents had died in wars or in famine, and they didn't really know where they came from. What about the middle psukim? It says Kruv Adon V'imer, right? The words are Kruv, which can mean a lot of things. It can mean a cabbage, but it can also mean, we're going to talk about Kruvim, the cherubs on the Aron. Adon, which literally means a master. And Imer, which we're going to derive for a second, comes from the word Namer, which is the very important leopard, right? So what does that have to do with anything? Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Adon. It's as if we're saying, the Adon, meaning God, said, Ani amarti yu Yisrael lefanai chashuvim kikruv. I intended for my Bnei Yisrael to be as chashuv, as respected, as purified, I guess, in their relationships, as a kruv, like the cherubs, like on the Aron. The Haim samu atzmam kin namer, but they made themselves like a namer, like a leopard. And of course, the mashal here is that a leopard is not of pure skin; it is spotted, right? So they are a very questionable spot. That's one interpretation of why a namer is not a respected thing in the setting. Some say Amar Adon, that God is actually saying the opposite. Even though they were inappropriate or impetuous or as free in their relationships like a namer, they are as chashuv to me as a kruv. So I view them, despite that, as being dear to me, unlike their behavior like a namer. Okay? Again, not so sure why the rabbis were so against Nimerim. They didn't like leopards so much. Continues the Gemara. Where are we? Amar Rabba Bar Bachana. In my Gemara, there's a Tosfot Riyaz Zakein on the left, but I don't know if everyone has that. So it's around 15 lines down. Amar Rabba Bar Bachana. Amar Rabba Bar Bachana. Anyone who marries a person who is not suited for him. Now, the Gemara understands here, what does that mean, not suited for him? Meaning not the right person. We said in our Mishnah, Kohen can only marry Kohen Yisrael Levi, or certain groups can only marry. Let's say a person marries someone they're not supposed to marry, from Micha's standpoint, because they love the person, or the person is wealthy, or they want to get involved with the family, whatever the reason is. Says the Gemara, Ma'aleh alav hakatuv, kilu charsho l'chol alam kulo, v'zaro melech. It's as if they plowed over the whole world and dug in salt, right? So salt's very damaging for land, at least for growing crops. And so that's how they would ruin land, right? You would plow it up and you would sprinkle salt over it to basically ruin its fertility. And that's basically what this person is doing. Shnamar, based on this pasuk, Elo ha'olim mitel melech tel charsha. These people came, and we're using the words here, charesh, meaning that they charesh means to plow, and melech, that they plowed it and put in with salt. So you're basically destroying the world by choosing your own personal desire over what is appropriate for you. And how you decide what's appropriate for you, we're going to continue to discuss. Amarav Rav Ada Amarav, the person gets married ignoring the yichus, but does it because the person's wealthy, so they marry someone they're not supposed to marry, or someone who's not appropriate for them because they want to get involved with this very wealthy family. Havin lo banim she'ena mehuganim. Their children will be not mehugan, not the best. Shenemer bahashem bagdu, that you've rebelled against Hashem, ki banim zarim yaladu, and so you're going to have children who are foreign. We're reading it the opposite. That since you rebelled against Hashem, you're therefore going to have children who are not good children. Says the Gemara, well, maybe you'll have bad children, but at least you'll be rich, right? Shema tomar mamon palet. At least you'll save over the money. The pasuk continues there in Hosea. Ata yochlim chodesh et chalkeim. In 1 month, you're going to devour everything that you got. Shema tomer chalko v'lechalka. They're plural, meaning the whole riches are going to be lost. Now, of course, we don't see this happening in real time, but meaning over time, it's not going to be worth it. Shema tomar l'zman meruba. You might think it happens eventually. Talmud omer chodesh. That's why it says chodesh, that even in real time, close to real time, you're going to lose the riches that you married for because you married inappropriately. My mashma, how do you see that? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, chodesh nichnas, the chodesh yatsa. A month will come in, a month passes, umemonam avad, and in the interim you lost the riches. So it is inappropriate, says the Gemara. If you get married for money, you're going to end up losing the money and having offspring that are not mehugan.
Didn't God order Hosea to marry someone whom he really should not have married under normal circumstances?
So correct. So a lot of Hosea deals with people marrying inappropriately, but God's very clear about that. And it's a lesson, of course, right? Marrying the woman who you shouldn't marry, and it's a siman for God. They are rejecting Bnei Yisrael. Correct. Earlier in Hosea. Okay, continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Oh, I did that. Sorry. Amar Rabba bar Avada v'Amrila Rabbi Sala Amar Rav Hamnuna. Okay, anyone who is nosei, this is relevant, especially people about to get married, right? Kol ha-nosei isha she'ena hogenet lo. Anyone who marries a person, it says an isha, but I guess it goes both ways here, who is not appropriate for them. And again, we're specifically referring to appropriate based on yichus, which in the broadest sense, right, means what our Mishnah said. If you're a Yisrael, you can't marry you can't marry a Givoni, let's say, right, in a teen. But maybe it means more broadly, right? Someone who's not the most appropriate from a family that's miyuchas. So anyone who does that, Elio kofto, Elio ties the person down. Hakadosh Baruch Hu rotzo, and God provides, smacks the person, hits the person. The Tana, again, I'm not sure where this comes from. Al kulam Elio kotev hakadosh Baruch Hu chotem. Elio writes that they did something wrong about their children, and God seals it. Oyelo the posel tzar. This is what they write. Woe to the one who ruins their children by marrying, say, a mamzeret or something, or the pogemet mishpachto and hurts their family. Ulenosei isha she'ena hogenet lo, right? And one who marries a person who is not appropriate for them, there Elio kofto v'akadosh baruch hu rotzo. That's where we just said God Elio ties them down and Hashem does the ritzua. Most take out those words because it's sort of repetitive. We just said the exact same thing. So you see here the gra, or the aleph takes that out. Continues the Gemara, very, very important halacha, which we are again almost smack in the middle of the daf. It's really hard to find landmarks in this daf. But if you have that aleph of the gra, it's right beyond that. The Gemara says the following: Kola posel pasul. Right? Anyone who apostles other people, right? Meaning they go around saying this person's a mamzer, this person's inappropriate. Pasul, you assume that person himself is pasul. The eno midaber b'shvacha la'olam, and you never should say good things about that person. Okay? Well, sorry, that's one interpretation. The other is that person is a person who is an eno midaber b'shvacha la'olam. They never say nice things about other people. And said Shmuel bimumo posel. That not only is a person who goes around spreading bad words about other people considered to be pasul themselves, but you assume that they're pasul in the thing that they say. Right? If they walk around and call other people an eved, which is the case we're going to have in a second, then we assume they're from avadim, right? And I just want to point out, I mean, this is really relevant. I mean, to us, it's less relevant because I think not really that's less relevant, but our assumption is that no one knows where they come from, right? It's impossible to trace your yichus nowadays from thousands of years of exile and destruction and Holocaust, et cetera, et cetera. But certainly after the destruction of the temple, when people were very confident about where they came from, right? The Torah has a tremendous focus on mishbechotam, and your inheritance goes on your family, your a lot of the fights in the Torah and the Navi are about who people can marry. Right? You marry out of your tribe, out of your family. And of course, as we're going to see, Avadim were huge, as were Gerim, right? There was a tremendous flow out and into Bnei Yisrael. And so keeping track of who was from an Eved and who was potentially from a convert was a huge focus, especially in Bavel in this time, right? So we're going to see that in a second. Says the Gemara, Pola posel, right? Sorry, we read that already. I'll read it again. Anyone who passes others, we assume they're pasel. And Shmuel said, B'mumo pasel. So now we have a great story. It's going to take us for a while. It's a really fascinating story that's going to illustrate sort of a day in the life in Bavel, right? And again, this is the times of Shmuel. So Shmuel was around, I think, around the year 200. So, or maybe later, 250. Anyways, there was a man, right? And Hahu Gavra Dimin Harda, right? This person lived in the Harda, okay? And he all lebei matbechaya b'pumpadita. He went one day. This is a great story. Guy lives in Naharda, right? Shmuel was born in 165 and died in 254. Okay, so exactly then. So there's a guy. This is not Shmuel yet. There's a guy who lives in Naharda, and he went to the butcher shop in Pumpadita. They had great meat in Pumpadita, right? The best salami. So he went to Pumpadita to go to the shop. Amarlu, and he said to them, not the nicest thing, Havuli Bisra. I'm making a big feast. I need 20 pounds of meat. Give me the meat. Amrulay, they said to him, slow down, take a number, right? Nitar, wait, Ad Shakel Shamed Rav Yehuda Bar Yecheskel. Nitarlay. Look, we've got a very important customer ahead of you. The attendant of Rav Yehuda Bar Yecheskel. Rav Yehuda was a student of both Rav and Shmuel, if you recall. Remember, Rav died and he went and became a student of Shmuel. So Rav Yehuda Bar Yecheskel's attendant is here, and he's shopping for his Shabbos party. So I got to help him first. I'll cut your meat. Everyone who's waited at a butcher counter knows that feeling, right? You're waiting for them to finish cutting the guy ahead of you. So I'll give it to you. Ambar, so this guy was like, who the heck is that? Man Yehuda Bar Shviskel, the Kadimlai, right? So he was making fun of him. Who's this Yehuda? Instead of saying Yecheskel, he said Shviskel, which Rashi is like a sort of a negative, a derogatory term for someone who eats a lot of meat, right? Who's this Yehuda Bar Shviskel who's going to come ahead of me? The Shakam min Kamai. Who the heck is that guy? So this made a big stir. Azlu Amalei the Rav Yehuda. They told Rav Yehuda that this guy in the store was demeaning you. Shamte. Rav Yehuda said, "Look, I'm the Rosh Hashiva, I'm the Talmud Chacham. I'm putting him into Cherem. I'm putting him into Nidoi, which means no one can talk to him. He's totally off limits." Amr, they said to Rav Yehuda, this guy, not only is he a big, he doesn't want to wait in line, but Ragel Dekari Inchi Avde. He curses people out all the time. Anytime someone argues with him, he says, "Oh, you're a slave. You're an Eved. You're a mamzer," right? Like people, of course, do nowadays, or not nowadays, but over time. So he always calls people by a bad name. So Rav Yehuda heard that and he said, if you call someone an Eved, it means you're an Eved. So Achar Zaled Avdu. So Yehuda said, this guy, we don't know his name, but this guy, he comes from Avadim, meaning he can't marry a Miyuchas Yisrael. He's from an Eved. So Azalhu, now this guy heard that Rav Yehuda cursed him out and called him an Eved, and so he brought him to court for libel, right? So now not in the Harda where Rav Yehuda lived, but he went back to, not in Pumbedita, but in Naharda. So Azal Havu, Azmine Ladina Lekamed Rav Nachman. He goes to Rav Nachman's court and he files a lawsuit and says, this man, Rav Yehuda Bar Yecheskel, could be left out the Rav, right? Yehuda Bar Yecheskel is calling me an Eved. I want to bring him to court and sue him for damages. So he went to Rav Nachman. Now remember, Rav Nachman was a very, very senior judge, not in the same town, right? In Naharda. So Shmuel was in Pumbedita. Rav Yehuda, I keep saying Shmuel. Rav Yehuda was a student of Shmuel. Was in Pumbedita. Rav Nachman was in Naharda. So this fool, we'll call him for now, went to Rav Nachman and said, I want to call Rabbi Yehuda to din. So Aite Pitka da Hazmana. So they did. They put a subpoena in. They put a document that said to Rabbi Yehuda, come to court on January the 1st in Naharda, and you're going to have to answer for your actions of calling a person an Eved. Now, also Rabbi Yehuda Kamed Rav Huna. Rabbi Yehuda got this in the mail, and he went to Rav Huna and said, this is getting all the rabbis in bubble here. Amrle, he said, I don't know what to do. Ezel lo ezel. should I go to court on January 1st, as I was called by Reb Nachman, or not? Right? Because I'm an independently, wise person. What right does that district court have to call me? Right? So everyone's following the questions here, right? These are real modern dilemmas here. So do I go or not go? So Amalei, Rav Huna said to him, look, Mezal lomi lach mezal. Really, you don't have to go, right? Rev Nachman has no authority to compel you to go. Mishum the Gav Rabbah, you're equally great or greater. Ela Mishum Yaakov de Benasiya Kumzil. But the problem is that Rev Nachman also happened to be married into the royal family, right? He was married to the daughter of the Nasi. And so because of that, he has sort of political authority. You should really go. It's not a good idea to start these kind of fights. So you should go to court. Okay. So Rav Yehuda gets up on January 1st. He goes to Nahar Da'ah in order to be summoned to court by Rav Nachman. On his way, we're about to see that he wants to humiliate Rav Nachman, who called him in. So Abda Ashkali Tikavin Makeh. He comes up, he shows up in Rav Nachman's court, Rav Nachman's house, and Rav Nachman is on the roof on a ladder building a ma'akeh. Ma'akeh is what do you call it? Like a railing, right? That you make around the roof to make it safe. So Amrle, so Yehuda said to Rav Nachman, what are you doing up there? Aren't you the Dayan? Don't you know what Rav Huna Bar Idi said in the name of Shmuel, that once you're made a public person, you're not allowed to do physical labor in front of the public, in front of 3 people. You can't be outside on your roof, putting new tiles on. It's a bizayon of the tzibur. Once you're designated as the new leader, you're not allowed to be there. So Amalei said, well, you're right, but I was just porta de good. Let me read the word. Gunderita hudakavina. I'm only putting a tiny bit of fencing. It's like I'm not doing work. I'm just fixing the tiles. You just said back to him, what do you mean porta de gunderita? A little bit of fencing. Why are you using the word gunderita? What are you, I don't know what the negative would be. But why don't you use the words of the Torah? Misanya ma'akeh, right? Did you hate the words of our Torah? It's incredible how attacking, is. Do you hate the word ma'akeh? The Torah says build a ma'akeh. Why do you use the word gundarita? What are you, some fancy SAT prep or something? So why don't you use the word ma'akeh? Or you could use the word mechitza that says in the Mishnah and the Gemara all the time, Damar Rabbanan. Why do you have to call out some fancy Latin word of gundarita, right? I don't know if it's Latin, obviously, but his point was, your speech is not scholarly speech. Amalei said, I'm sorry. Let's start over again. Yadivmar akarpita. Wait, why don't you have a seat on the karpita? Actually, the karpita is like a bench or like a table. So Amalei said, what do you mean, the karpita? What kind of word is that to use? Misani safsal, damur rabbanan? You hate the word that the rabbis used of safsal? Or itztaba? Right, the Gemara at least talks about an itztaba, which is, remember, we had in Sukkot a lot, right? An itztaba is like a stool. Why do you have to use the word karpita? Amrle, and I think he was sort of making fun of him, that like you've become very close to the government. You sort of forgot how to talk like a Jew. Where's your Yiddish kind of thing, right? So Amrle said, well, okay, you see Rav Nachman was trying to de-escalate. Lechomar atrunga. Let me feed you an atrunga, right? What's an atrunga? An etrog, right? Have an apple, have a lemon, right? That's, I guess, what they ate. So Amrle said, Hachi Amar Shmuel, you know what my teacher Shmuel said? Anyone who says the word etrunga is full of themselves. Tilta b'ramadruach. They are, a third of them is haughtiness, right? Either use the word etrog, the karyu rabbanan. You say the word etrog like the Torah says, actually. Oh, etroga damri inchi, right? You want to use the vernacular. You could say etroga, but your fancy schmancy word, etrunga. Amrle, anyways, finally, Rav Nachman says, okay, have a drink. Okay, calm down, right? Lishtimar anbaga. Remember the ambaga, we've had this a lot of times as well. The ambaga was sort of the mixture of like a concoction that would accompany, it was wine, but it was wine and herbs and, all kinds of good stuff and oil in there that made people like a smoothie, we'll call it. So he said back to him, what do you mean? You got to call that an ambaga? Mi sunny isparugas? Like we call it asparagus, right? It sounds not like asparagus. Nikayu Rabbanan, or anpak damriyanshin. What are you so full of yourself, Rav Nachman? You're so fancy. You're married to the daughter of the king, and you got to talk like you don't know anything. Amrle, so finally he said to him, look, Teti donag tishdikun. Let my daughter Donag come out and give us drinks. Like he's really trying to de-escalate. Amalei, so Rabbi Yehuda said to him, "You Amar Techi Amar Shmuel, Emishtamshim Beisha. You can't have women or at least family members be servants for you." Oh, he said Kitanahi. Well, she was young; it doesn't matter as much. No, Beferish Amar Shmuel, Emishtamshim Beisha Klal, Ben Gedola, Ben Kitana. You can't use a woman in your house as a attendant, whether she's old or young. So finally, he said, "Nishader Mar Shlama Liyalta." Rabbi Yehuda's wife, right? Sorry, the opposite. Rav Nachman's wife was Yalta, right? So he said to him, "Why don't you send Sorry, the opposite, right? Yehuda's wife was Yalta, I think. Send a shalom to the Rav Nachman's wife was Yalta, right? So Rav Nachman was trying again to get Rav Yehuda to be a little bit more human with him, and he said, "Would you want to say hi to my wife?" Right? Like, let's get off topic for a minute. He said to him, "What do you mean? I can't talk to your wife. The sound of a woman is an erva." He said, "Well, I don't need to talk to her. We could do it through a messenger." Turn the page. Very, very long, big next page. It's not appropriate to start talking about a person's wife even to their husband. I'm sorry, you're not allowed to send a message. He said, so let me do it through me. Anyways, finally, this is going on, right? So Rabbi Yehuda is beating up Rav Nachman, basically, and showing how ignorant he is and how uncouth he is and how inappropriate he is, because Rav Yehuda is very angry that he was called by Rav Nachman to come to court. He thought it was a huge embarrassment for his position. So finally, Rav Nachman's wife Yalta hears about what's happening, and she's like, "Slow down. This is getting way out of control." So Shalchale Debitu, finally his wife sends him a message saying, "Shari le Tigre, right? Why don't you send him on his way and finish what you're doing with him? The lo nishvayach kishar amaretz. He's going to make you turn into. You're going to look like an amaretz in front of him, right? Rav Yehuda is constantly belittling you and showing you how much less smart you are than him. Let's just get him out of the house." So finally, Rav Nachman said, "Okay, I give up." Amar le my shati demarachim. Why are you here, Rav Yehuda? Like, why'd you come to terrorize me? Amar le, he said to him, "Well, because you called me, right? Taska da hazmenuta shadamar batray. You sent me a form of hazmana. You called me to come." So obviously, Rav Nachman did not realize when he sent him that it was Rav Yehuda, probably, right? So, but Rav Yehuda says, "You called me to come." Amar le, so he said to him, "What do you mean I sent it to you, right? Hashta shuta demar logamiri. I can't even speak to you," said Rav Nachman, right? "You're clearly so much wiser than me in language. Haska dahazmanuta mishadin lamar. You think I would send you a summons? I would have never done such a thing." So Rav Yehuda, of course, pulls out the summons, right? Afek diska dahazmanuta mi bechade. He pulls out from his jacket. Again, you have to do the play of this, right? Pulls out his hazmana. And he shows it to him. Amrle, look, Hagavra, Hadiska. Here I am, and here's my husband now. Amrle, so now they're stuck, right? Rav Nachman's here. They're sitting outside the courtroom. Rav Yehuda has his summons to come to court. Rav Nachman's super embarrassed how this ever happened. But he says to him, "Look, I can't, we got to at least go through the motions now, because since you came here, Rav Yehuda, the Shtaya Mele, I got to listen to the words. I got to have a court case. And otherwise, people are going to say, "Oh, the rabbis all protect each other," right? You call a rabbi gets a traffic ticket, he goes to court, and they release him. So you're here, you're in court on January 1st. The defendant, or is he that what he called? No, he's the defendant. The other guy, the bad guy, or whatever, the claimant is there in court. We've got to at least hear the case. So tell me what happened. So the man got up and said, "I'm here because Rabbi Yehuda put me in cherem, and I don't think it was appropriate." So Rav Nachman said to Rabbi Yehuda, "My time is Shamti Marlu Gavra. Why did you put him in cherem?" And he said, "Well, because he was harassing a messenger of the Rabbanan." He didn't say it was him, right? But he said a messenger of the Rabbanan. So Rav Nachman said, "Well, Benagdemar, why don't you give him a makot? Why don't you lash him?" The Rav, the Amora, was minaged mandim and tzayir shluchad Rabbanan. He would give lashes to people who started up and pained and harassed the messengers of Rabbanan. So said Rabbi Yehuda, no, because he did worse than just the messengers of Rabbanan. He insulted me. And so I had to do even something greater than lashes, which is to excommunicate him. The Adif Minei Avdilai. So I did something even worse. So then Rav Nachman said, okay, my time ma'achmas marale da avdu. Why did you say he's an Eved? How do you, sure he did something wrong, but how could you call him and call his yichus and his family into question, right? How could you say he's an Eved? We are at the first wide line. Seems like we've been doing this for a long time, and we have 14 minutes. We're going to get there, James. I'm going to read fast. Why did you call him an Eved? Amar Leisa, Rav Yehuda said back to Rav Nachman, the Ragel, the Kari Anshe Avde, because he calls everyone else an Eved. The Tani, and we learned, Kolat Posel, anyone who invalidates another person, the Mumo Posel, he becomes Pasul. The Eino Medaber B'Shvach Olam, you never can say anything good about him. V'amar Shmuel, the Mumo Posel. Shmuel taught us that when you call someone else a mamzer, it's because you're afraid that you're a mamzer. If you call someone else an Eved, it means you're an Eved. Amar says, so Rav Nachman said back to him, 1 second. Amar the Amar Shmuel the Mechashlei. I hear that Shmuel said that you should be concerned about it, but it doesn't mean you definitively know that to announce in the public domain, Lach Rosa La Mi Amar, can you announce that we know this guy's a mamzer, this guy's an Eved? It just means that like we question the person. It doesn't mean you assume that that's what they are. So this Rav Nachman fought back with Rav Yehuda. But as they're sitting there chatting about this, right? The guy comes from the Harda, so we understand. The words are not clear if you read them or not, but in parentheses it says that man came from the Harda, right? It's questionable because he was probably there the whole time. But anyways, Amr Luahu Bardina Rabbi Yehuda. So the guy who was angry at Rabbi Yehuda said, "What do you mean you're calling me an Eved? L'didi karitli avda? I'm from the most respected family in Bnei Yisrael. Atina mi beit Chashmonai Malka. I'm from the royal family. I come from the house of Tudors here, right? I come from Beit Chashmonai. I'm from that family. Again, this is around the year 200. Chashmonai was 300 years before, right? Or 400 years before. But he said, I come from that family. Amrlay. So then they were like, oh, we figured this guy out. Because Hachi Amr Shmuel very famously said, Kol da Amarmi de Beit Chashmonai Katina Avdahu. Anyone who says they come from the Chashmonaim family is an Eved, right? Because Hordus, whatever his name was, Hordus, killed every single person, every child in Beit Chashmonai. And the only ones who were left were servants in the house who had not pure lineage. And they pretended they were Chashmonaim and they claimed they were children, right? And this was very, very common, of course, right? That you wouldn't know who was who after you slaughtered the whole family. And they were very good back then in slaughtering the whole family, right? To get rid of any Yorshim, any inheritors. And so the rule is that anyone who says they're from Chashmonai is in fact from an Eved. Amar Lei, so Rav Nachman said to Rav Yehuda, that's an important halacha of Shmuel. But remember, you can't show up with a halacha that no one ever heard before and use it to support your case, right? Because it seems pretty self-serving. If you're a scholar and you teach over halacha, right, and then it turns out to be advantageous for your case. So if before the event happened you taught this, right, you were the source of the halacha, and 10 years later it was relevant for you, then shominlo. It doesn't matter that you're the source because you said it before the event. But if you didn't, meaning you're sitting here having a dispute and you say, oh, I remember that I heard from Shmuel that I'm right. Well, you can't rely on that because it happened after the thing happened, right after the event. Imlavin shominlo. Amrlei. He said to him, look, I don't want to say that I'm the source for this halacha from Shmuel, that any child of Chashmonai is considered to be a slave. Look, Rav Matna is sitting here, and I bet you if you've asked Rav Matna, he's going to tell you exactly what I just told you. And we did not coordinate this ahead of time. Ha'ikar Rav Matna the koi kavati. Rav Matna is sitting here, and he's going to tell you the exact same thing, right? Now, Rav Matna, lo chazia l'narda tleisar shnei. Rav Matna had not made a visit to Nahar Da'ah, where this discussion was happening for 13 years. But of course, as luck would have it, that day he shows up in Nahar Da'ah. Ayu Yuma Ata. That day he shows up out of the blue in Nahar Da'ah, right? And so now, of course, how do we ask him about this halacha of Shmuel? You can't be like, did Shmuel say this? Or obviously you're giving it away. So what did they say? What did Rav Yehuda say to him? Yehuda said, Amrle, do you remember, Rav Yehuda saying this to Rav Matna, the Chirmar, do you remember, sir, my Amr Shmuel, do you remember what Shmuel said on, September the 3rd, as we were standing in the forest? So he gives the background. You remember what Shmuel said? Kikoi chada kara aguda v'chada kara b'mabra. At one time, remember Shmuel was talking to us and the boat was leaving. And we had one more question for Shmuel. He had 1 foot on the land and 1 foot in the boat, right? So it was a memorable time, right? There was that time. You remember what Shmuel said, and Rav Yehuda didn't tell him what Shmuel said. And you know what Rav Matna said? Amar lei, hachi Amar Shmuel. I remember exactly what Shmuel said. Called Amar mi debeit Chashmonai malka katina avdahu. Right? Anyone who says they come from Chashmonai is an Eved. Why? Lo ishtayer minayo ela hiravita. From the whole descendants of Chashmonai, from the legitimate descendants, there was one little girl, one Ravita, one young woman. And she, when they came to kill the whole family or to take her or to rape her or to marry her, she ran up to the roof, Salkala Igra, Viram Yakla, and she called out, Mamra, I'm the last survivor, and I'm going to die now. So anyone who claims that they're from Hashmonai is a liar. Kol Amar mi Beit Hashmonai Anna Avdahu. Anyone who says they're from Hashmonai is really an Eved, and then she jumped off the roof, Nafla mi Igra, she fell off the roof, Umeta, and she died. And Achrosh Alan, so at the end of this whole story, is that Rav Nachman said, okay, Rav Yehuda, you're right about everything, and this guy is an Eved, right? This guy who stood in front of you in the meat line, and this guy who called other people Avadim, and claims he's from the royal family, in fact, he's an Eved, and he can't marry anyone who an Eved can't marry. He can convert, just to be clear. But Achros Aleh, the Avdahu, that person is an Eved, and this led to tremendous social upheaval in the Hardah, because everyone who was from this great family, right, turned out was from a family of slaves, right? And so all the marriages, Ahu Yuma, that day, Ikarun Kamak Ketubata bin Naharda, they teared up, they ripped up many marriage certificates, many ketubot in Naharda, right? People that got married on the premise that they were marrying into the royal family, it turns out they're marrying a bunch of slaves, right? So this had huge implications. Kanafik says the Gemara, just the final proscript. When Yehuda left Naharda to go back home to Pumbedita, all the people ran after him to throw stones at him because he had ruined all their lives, right? He had ruined all the yichus of Naharda. They were going to stone him. Amalei said, listen, I got much more in my back pocket. You want to start up with me, says Rav Yehuda? Ish shatiknu shatiku. If you're quiet now and you let me go, I'll keep my peace. But Elo, if you want to start up with me and start troubling me, megalna alaichu hada amar Shmuel. I'm going to reveal what Shmuel said. Shmuel said, Tarti zarayata ika benarda. There are two zarot. There are two lineages, two families that are very famous in Naharda. You want to know something? One of them is totally illegitimate. One is like a Yonah. They're like this week's parsha, right? With Noah. One is pure. But Chada Mekarna Debe or Ravta. One is like an Orev, is from impure stock. And Simanech is that the one who's Tameh is Tameh and Tahar Tahar. And if you're not quiet, I'm going to talk about which family is the unpure family. So they all gave up because everyone knew that there were skeletons in their closet. The Shadel Rigma Midayo, they all dropped the stones, and it was so many stones that they dropped that it actually dammed up the river. Come Atma Bahar Malka, it led to a blockage in the Har Malka. Anyways, so clearly there was a lot of questionable stuff going on. And in fact, continues the Gemara as we talk about Pumbedita, Machash, this is not Naharda, right? Pumbedita. So Machash Rav Yehuda, but Pumbedita Rav Yehuda seemed to make both trouble and clarify things. He announced in Pumbedita that the following families, so anyone, if you need to know where we are, again, in my Gemara, there is a comment on the right, but we are around 2/3 of the way down. Machash Rav Yehuda Pumbedita, that Ada and Yonatan are Avdi. These people, Ada and Yonatan, they come from slaves, meaning, and all their children are slaves. And Yehuda Bar Papa, Mamzera. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Papa, not Rabbi Yehuda. Yehuda Bar Papa is a Mamzer. Bati Bar Tuvia, Mutrucha Lo Shako Gita De Cheruta. Bati Bar Tuvia, he was a slave. He was freed by his master, but because he's Ramat Ruach, because he was so haughty, he wouldn't accept the get, and therefore he remains a slave. And so anyone he marries still has a status until they convert and become free. Machas Rava b'Mechoza, Rava announced in Mechoza the following families, right, are problematic. Bala'e Dana'e, Tala'e, Mala'e, Zaga'e, Kulam Lipsul. All those families are questionable. Don't marry into them, without checking out. Rav Yehuda said, Govai, the people who are a family of Govai, they are Givoni. They come from Givon, which we said, remember, is not appropriate, not properly converted. Dornita, those who live in the village of Dornita, they are, in fact, Dornita is an acronym for Darei Nitinae. They're a village of Nitinim, so they're also Pasuk. Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef, in fact, said, Hi Beikuba de Pumbedita. If you look at the people who live in Beikuba, Kulam da Avdi. It was a whole village that was populated by slaves. And this was believable, of course, right? A whole bunch of slaves went after the destruction of the temple and they started living there. And over several generations, people forgot exactly who they were. So this is part of that attempt. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Right, I didn't skip, did I? Nope. Arba Meot Avadim. In fact, there were 400 Avadim who came from the destruction, basically. And this is now, according to the Gemara, the destruction of the first temple, so 700 years prior. Some say there were 4,000 slaves. They were owned by this person, Pashur ben Imer, which Rashi quotes here, was a person, a character in the times of Yirmiyahu. If you look in Sefer Yirmiyahu, Pashur shows up as a Kohen. And all these people were exiled. They were all slaves. They were not Jews. They were slaves, right? So Evi Kanani. The Kulan Nitmu B'Kuana, they all faked and lied about who they were, and they got assimilated into the Kuna. The Kohen Sheish Ba'azut Ruach Eino El. You find the Kohen who's very azut, very haughty, it's probably because he comes from them and he's not really a Kohen. He's a Kohen, but he's married in the family of slaves. Amar Abaya, and Abaya said, I know exactly where these guys live. Kulan Yatvan B'Shur Denarda. They all live in that row. Shura means a row. Some people say it means the Chashav row. Right? The most respected houses in Naharda are full of these phonies. Now, in fact, that argues to Rebbe Lazar, if you see a Kohen who's very quick to get angry, or really Azut means that they're very haughty. That's normal for Kohanim. Kohanim fight all the time. So, don't question a Kohen who's got a bad attitude, but that's a question about who these people were. Anyways, let's try to finish. We got 2 minutes. Amar Rav Yehuda of Avin bar Adam Rav. Did I get the right place? Yeah. Amar Rav Avin bar Ravada Amar Rav. Where are we up to? I don't know if everyone has it. There's a pasuk in Hosea on the left. It says Rav Avin bar Ravada Amar Rav. If you marry a woman who is not appropriate for you for ulterior motives because you want to make money or get into a family, then that's going to be a bad status for you. When God comes and puts God's Shechina on Bnei Yisrael, God will testify and protect all the tribes, but not that person. Ein me'id alav. Shneimar, as it says, Shiftei Yah Edut Yisrael. God will testify when the Shvatim belong to Hashem. When the Shvatim are pure, that's where Hashem testifies and protects them. When God comes and puts God's Shechina on Bnei Yisrael, only for families that are miyuchas, that have good lineage, not those who married inappropriately. God says, I will be God for all the families of Yisrael. Why does it say all families? Why doesn't it say all Yisrael? It says, it has to be those who stayed true and married appropriately within the family. And it says, continued in Yecheskel, Behema Yulila Am, Amaraba Barafuna, Zuma Gerim. This is a difference, interesting, between people who are Jews by choice and those who were born into Judaism, Yisrael, and those who became converts. By Yisrael it says, God says, I will be their God, and they will be my Am, meaning I will initiate it. But by Gerim, remember, it's the opposite, right? Because Gerim choose to become part of Bnei Yisrael, right? So it's not that God goes out to them, they come to God, right? Ilu Gerim chtiv, Mi huza aravet libo, who is this one who pledged their heart, Lageshet Elaino Hashem. They came to me. Once they come to me, continues the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, Hayiti li la'am, Anochi yeyeh lehem le'elohim. They will be my Am, and I will be their God. So they have to require an extra step because Gerim have to initiate the process of becoming closer to Hashem. And the final thing we'll say today, Amar Rabbi Chelbo, we've had this many times, especially recently in Yevamot, Kashim Gerim Lishal Kisapacha. Gerim are as difficult, I'll use that word, for Bnei Yisrael as a sapachat. Sapachat's a wound like a tzarat. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you why in a second. Shenemar, because it says, V'noveh ger alehem, a ger will join you, a convert will join you. V'nispechu al Beit Yaakov. They will, nispechu literally means they'll attach to Bnei Yisrael, but the word nispechu is a weird word. That they will be sort of a negative thing, like a tzarat. Now, why is that? Why would we ever say that a ger is like a tzarat? So James is running to shul, so he's going to miss this. But why would we say that a ger is like tzarat? So remember, we've had this many times before. Rashi says sometimes it's because gerim either come and bring foreign influences, right? Because they didn't grow up in the Jewish environment, so we're worried about what they bring, or that they are not knowledgeable because they weren't born and they didn't have the education, and so they can't observe mitzvot with the same integrity until they can work at it, but it's a lot harder for gerim. Tosfot, so that's a negative, right? Elsewhere, Tosfot talks about several other interpretations. Remember, we quoted this in Yevamot. He doesn't bring it here. The Tosfot quoted from one of the Bali Tosfot who was a ger. I think Rabbi Avram Hager was his name. I forgot the first name, but it's a Tosfot I have in Yevamot, I believe, who says that it's because gerim are very careful in the daktik mitzvah, right? They're Jews by choice, so they're much more careful, and it looks bad for everybody else who was born with this, who went to Jewish day school, who had every opportunity. Why aren't you being as careful as the gerim? So it basically becomes a critique on people who are born Jews from the gerim. So that's a much nicer interpretation that Tosfot from the Bali Tosfot who are gerim include together. But anyways, there's a lot of interpretation of this, and we will stop with that thought, I will say, and we will continue. I forgot. It actually is Tosfot here. It's the next Amud. It's Rabbi Avram Hager on Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph, if you want to look at the Tosfot. That Tosfot says because they are bikiyim b'mitzvot, they are careful in mitzvot, they're medaktikim, they sort of make the rest of Bnei Yisrael look a little bit bad. So we will stop with there. And we will hopefully pick it up there tomorrow morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Time for Shachar.
Yashar Koach.
Shavua Tov.